Welcome to another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. You're listening to a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State, featuring writer, poet, and musician Rick Pidcock. Now here's Rick.
It's been a week since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And while much is being said about the Trump administration's crackdown on free speech this week, especially with the demand for Jimmy Kimmel's job, another storyline is how people on the right are comparing Kirk to their greatest heroes. Here's Texas Republican Congressman Troy Nehls.
I would say if Charlie Kirk lived in the biblical times, he'd have been the 13th disciple. He'd have been the 13th disciple.
On Monday's episode, I shared audio of an AI video that had an AI Kirk after death talking about being a martyr alongside the apostles Paul, Andrew, Stephen, and Peter. Then, in a piece I wrote titled Two AI Videos Depict Charlie Kirk in Heaven as a Martyr, that was published at Baptist News Global on September 16th, I wrote about a second AI video of AI Kirk speaking to evangelicals after death. In addition to comparing him to the first disciples and apostles, another comparison that's coming up this week is to the man many conservatives would consider to be a modern-day apostle, the late Rush Limbaugh. Here was Glenn Beck filling in this week on The Charlie Kirk Show.
I brought something with me today that I thought was appropriate while I did the show, that I would sit in front of Charlie's microphone. It was given to me after the death of Rush Limbaugh by his wife. It is Rush's golden microphone. I think it's appropriate that it sits in front of Charlie's microphone.
Of course, despite my disagreements with Kirk or Beck, I don't want to mock Beck for his grieving a friend who died, but it's worth noting his comparison of Kirk to Limbaugh. In fact, Rush Limbaugh himself saw something in Kirk when he first met Kirk during the beginning stages of Turning Point USA.
There was a conference. What was it? Turning Point USA. How many kids were there? And there 3,000 student activists here it was actually over at West Palm Beach. And this is a group that has been put together and operates under the auspices of Charlie Kirk, right? Who is you're going to be hearing that name if you haven't. He's Charlie Kirk. Let me just tell you. I don't want to jinx him, but I'm just going to tell you. They brought Charlie Kirk to the golf course to meet me about a month ago. He was in town to set up this Turning Point thing, and they brought him to the golf course to meet me. It was we were getting ready for a 8:45 a.m. start. And they brought him out while I was getting ready to go to the range to loosen up. And I spoke with him for about a half hour. And he told me how he grew up in a home where my program was on all the time. He was just effusively complimentary to me, which I, of course, understood and told him he's very wise. His family's very wise. He chuckled. He laughed. This is the kind of guy that you can see really becoming big in politics as he gets older. He just has the courage, the personality, the charisma. You may think this sounds weird, but I remember when Bill Clinton became president, there were all of these stories about Bill Clinton at Oxford and Bill Clinton at Yale and Bill Clinton here and all these people who went to school with him. There was story after story after story where people were saying that they just knew Bill Clinton was going to be president someday. In college, he just had that kind of ambition, and he impressed people. And I'm telling you that people are saying the same things about Charlie Kirk.
With comparisons between Kirk and the disciples, between Kirk and the apostles, between Kirk and Rush Limbaugh, and between Kirk and U.S. presidents, one wonders how these comparisons could get even bigger and more dramatic. So evangelicals are like, hold my grape juice. Of course, we've heard them compare Kirk to Jesus on the cross by comparing the persecution of Kirk to the crucifixion of Jesus, just like they've done with Trump. And we've heard them compare Kirk to Jesus by pairing the resurrection of Jesus with the resurrection power of Turning Point USA. But the disgraced abusive pastor Mark Driscoll took the comparison between Kirk and Christ to new heights.
And so I had a prophetic vision I hope is true during worship. I saw Charlie ascend into the sky like a magnet, and I saw a bunch of pieces of metal gathering and being collected up under that magnet. And I pray that that is a generation that experiences revival and is brought together by the death and martyrdom of our brother and my friend Charlie Kirk, and that this becomes a move of God that is like the Jesus movement of the 60s.
Now Charlie Kirk is the ascending Christ, and with Kirk's ascension to the heavens in the form of a magnet, white evangelicals are caught up to meet Kirk in the air, and so shall they ever be with Kirk. Of course, remember what happens in white evangelical end times theology after evangelicals are raptured into the sky? They come back down to the earth, either immediately or within 7 years, depending on their timing, to unleash a bloodbath and then reign over the world in castles. With Republicans comparing Charlie Kirk to the disciples, to the apostles, to Rush Limbaugh, to U.S. presidents, and to a crucified, resurrected, and ascending Jesus himself, it's odd to see such cultish behavior resonate with college kids. Was Kirk's popularity on college campuses a sign that young people really want authoritarianism that dehumanizes their neighbors? Was his popularity merely due to his personality and charisma? Are we overestimating how popular he was? And what can universities do about it? To help me explore these questions, I sat down with Matthew Bodie, who is a professor at the University of North Georgia and is the author of the Seven Mountains Mandate, exposing the dangerous plan to Christianize America and destroy democracy. So you have a book coming out this fall, The Seven Mountains Mandate, that focuses on Christian nationalism. And in that world, we have these different realms, so to speak. Like there's the rad trad Catholics, the New Apostolic Reformation. We've got like non-charismatic Christians like Independent or Southern Baptists. So where does Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA fit into this world of Christian nationalism?
Turning Point and Charlie Kirk are the hub of the wheel for all the groups you just mentioned. He certainly is the heir to the Seven Mountains Mandate that came from the charismatic circles and the NAR. But because of his close relationship, because of his discovery, as J.D. Vance says, of the vice president and all the things that come with that, his Catholicism, that has put Charlie Kirk right in the center of that. And then you add the inroads that Turning Point has made in the Southern Baptist Convention. In recent years, some of the former presidents have spoken at Turning Point pastor summits. Turning Point was or is the indispensable organization for Christian nationalism at this point. And so any group that is interested in doing any element of that is going to want to attach itself to Turning Point. Certainly now after Charlie's assassination, it is not just obviously raking in a lot of money, it is generating a lot of people that are interested in it for that very reason.
So a lot of the talk about Kirk over the last week by his supporters has been how he connected with young people. And I even remember when he appeared on Gavin Newsom's podcast, Newsom told him that his son was basically starstruck that Newsom was interviewing Kirk. And so, like, why do you think Kirk has resonated with young people so much? Was it mostly due to his personality and charisma or due to his message? And to what degree do you think he actually resonated with college kids, or are we possibly overestimating his influence?
I mean, I do think before Turning Point, there was obviously a segment of students who were conservative, and whatever number or percentage that was, he gave them some bravado, some bravery, some courage if they needed it to speak out about being conservative. But I think what more than that, what made Charlie popular with young people was this persona of a truth teller. The whole mantra of Turning Point from its founding in 2012 till now was the answer to the opposite of political correctness. They would say things that needed to be said or say things that other people couldn't say. And Charlie specifically, right, said, he would say provocative things because they were true. And that he was part of that, facts over feelings, error for a moment. And so Charlie's persona of truth telling, that he would not be a politician, he would not lie to you, he would give you the truth no matter how hard it was to hear, was certainly part of it. The other part, of course, was just the physical presence of him on campus. He did campus events every semester, at least 5 to 10 every semester for every year since that I can remember. At universities across the United States, not just ones that were close to Arizona. He would go to places where he was not welcome. He would go to places where he would get large crowds. In terms of large crowds, I think obviously there are many people there that wanted to see him, that supported him, that supported Trump. But there are also many onlookers there who wanted to see the circus. And I think that those two things, his persona as a truth teller and his physical presence on campus, taking questions from all people, he was very articulate, very well read. I think he would have done well in college. He took on all of the things that people threw at him and did it over and over again. So I do think that resonated.
I've heard some conservative college kids even say that he made it okay, like he made them cool again. Like they didn't feel
Yeah,
cool
no,
until
yeah,
he.
that's totally true. If I can do a reference for you, if you remember the movie PCU with Jeremy Piven many years ago, right? There was this group of misfits who were in this house, and they had taken the house from this conservative Republican group. And the joke about the group is they wore blazers and ties, and that was not Charlie Kirk. If that politically correct university was sort of the subtitle of that movie back in the late 90s. So if Charlie Kirk comes on the scene, yes, he makes it cool again. These turning point events in Arizona and Florida were billed as parties, were billed as high energy, certainly political organizing and training, but were built for young people.
So speaking of these young people who may be misfits, of course not this doesn't apply to all of them, but a number of these political assassins and shooters over the past year have been young white men who are into gaming and memes. And it's brought some attention to a group of extremist right-wing young white men called the Groypers, who have been in a bit of a civil war with Kirk. I'm curious, like, what's the difference between these young men and normal everyday kids who just like to play video games? And like, what's the relationship between this young white male meme culture and Christian nationalism?
I want to start with that last question because I think with the person they arrested for Charlie's assassination, and let's include the person that shot at President Trump or candidate Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, to students on a rooftop with a gun. These people were the exact people that Charlie and his allies at Turning Point were trying to make politically active. So these people, as you well described, are heavily online, not just into video games, but into an online culture that is hard to follow if you're from the outside. I was reading this week about a phrase called brain rot. It is this kind of being terminally online thinking, and if you want to call it that, that just does not create a chain of significance. It's just totally inside jokes and memes and things that only those people get. And even at times, if you think about the markings on the ammunition, those markings were not merely anti-fascist. They could have been mocking that group. And so you really didn't know what they mean because they hardly ever mean thing and they change all the time. And with memes, especially, that is Benny Johnson, Turning Point's, or at some point, Turning Point's chief operating officer. That was his stick. He would go on tour with Turning Point and talk to people about how to make these and how to spread them on the internet. So these two types of people, young white men, disaffected, online, perhaps conservative or have some Republican leanings, maybe, or from Republican families. These are the types of people that Charlie Kirk wanted. And so to back to your other question about gropers, yes, they're certainly online and they made their thing online, but they have also had many important in-person events. Nick Fuentes, the leader of that group, is linked to the Charlottesville marches. And he's very articulate. He had got a New York Times profile of him recently. So you know that he's important. And I think that um, when that Civil War started, the idea was that Nick Fuentes and his group thought that Turning Point wasn't racist enough. And I'm not suggesting Turning Point was racist. What I'm suggesting is specifically on immigration. Nick Fuentes, who is white nationalist talking points, tried to get Charlie to talk about those things in a very far right way. Because in 2018 and 19, Charlie was not doing that. It is only when Charlie moved to Christian nationalism that he basically took on the talking points of Nick Fuentes and became a far right anti-immigration person. All the things that Charlie said about immigration now match what that group that attacked him was saying. And Nick has pointed that out, that he won the war, even though his profile is not as big as Charlie's. But I think in regard to Christian nationalism, that's where it can become difficult to draw lines, where Turning Point certainly has a wide coalition of people. Charlie and Turning Point are anti-immigration and they're for a particular culture, Western civilization, which does have ties to mainly white evangelical culture, but they are not in the same manner as Nick Fuentes. And so I think that those questions point at the stuff gets lost on social media and stuff gets lost on these meme cultures, that these nuances, these differences that are important get lost.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting diving into some of the Fuentes videos that have been going around recently. So, as the anger is setting in on the right, we're noticing Trump, Vance, Stephen Miller, and the head of the FCC making threats against free speech. In fact, the head of the FCC said about Jimmy Kimmel, we can either do this the easy way or the hard way. So, between that and all the threats universities have already been under from this administration, do you have any advice for scholars such as yourself regarding how to address this without putting yourselves or your families in danger too much?
Um, as you might imagine, with the Turning Point Professor watch list over the years, groups like the group that I represent, the American Association of University Professors, has created a sort of crisis management toolkit, mainly for people who face very quickly the online mob. And so we've seen many people, many professors in recent days be fired for comments about social media. Um, and so one of the things in the toolkit is obviously closing down your accounts, not closing them, I mean, making them private from the get-go, not after the fact. And then also, of course, you need to have conversations with your administration beforehand. I'm working in this area. I'm doing research in the area. I have a book coming out. You need to say all these things ahead of time. Now, of course, with these kind of um, out of the blue social media comments, it's kind of hard to protect yourself when you're the one making the comments. But at the same time, individual scholars and academics and professors are being targeted by people who don't like what they say, whether it is, about Charlie Kirk's a murder or other things. They will come looking for your social media. They will come looking for your inbox. They will come looking for your textbooks or your materials in class. So you need to be prepared for that if you're working in those areas. I obviously got many questions about being on the professor watch list, and to be honest with you, when I was on it or put on it in 2016, no one knew who Turning Point was. But so the blowback was not there. But now, if you get on it, you get the online hurricane for several days. Um, and just you need to be aware of that. I certainly would not suggest that it's reason to stop working. But at the same time, there are ways in which to not be provocative or inflammatory. But you also should know most anything you say could be used against you. So I think there are ways in which to slow it down and to not have it come, but at the same time, there's no ways to stop it.
Yeah. So last week, the day before Kirk's assassination, I attended a lecture at Clemson University with sociologist Samuel Perry, and I couldn't help but notice so many differences in like between like the venue or the tone between the different events. And I'd be curious, like, how do you think universities can engage young people and invite them in political discourse in ways that foster healthy community and learning rather than erupting into public vitriol toward one another? Because it seems like the Kirk events are going to attract a lot bigger of a crowd than the Samuel Perry sitting in a classroom event is.
Yes. The
But
free lectures on campus hardly ever get well attended.
yeah,
Um, Let me just say one, today Turning Point is continuing the tour that Charlie Kirk started when he was murdered. So they're having their next event at Colorado State today. So you expect large crowds at that. I don't know what the tone or style of that event will be, but it certainly will be engaging because they've always had that type of thing. Um, you know, I do think a lot of people like Sam have tried to make their scholarship more publicly accessible, both in books and these lectures things. And books and lectures may not be the thing that gets students. Um, and to be honest with you, also, I have trouble seeing the classroom as a space for this. Some people have talked about this week. I did address it with my students, the whole story of my link to the whole thing, because I had to cancel their conferences to do media interviews, and I wanted to explain why. But the classroom has become a space where it's very difficult to have class discussions on anything, let alone really heated, controversial, people are on different sides kind of thing, even if it's a class designed for that. So I do think these campus events, perhaps by Turning Point or others, are really the best way in which people see um, civic action. I'm not going to say that what Charlie does all the time is polite and civil, but it is a way in which to people to at least get a sense of how we should have conversations in America, or that we should have conversations in America. Classrooms are not necessarily debate areas. You certainly could take what you learn in a classroom and outside and take it to the quad. And you certainly could go to these lectures and ask questions that, really raise some important issues. But at the same time, our institutions, higher education being one of them, are really have become places where we can't have these conversations. I did a Sunday school presentation last Sunday, a couple days ago, about the book and Charlie. It had been planned in advance, and the person that was running the class said, "Hey, do you want to not do this?" And I'm like, "No, I think we can change it." I received some really good questions in the session. Obviously, a Sunday school class certainly could be a part of that. I think there are different ways to do it, but I just do think that because of our partisan polarized nation, these institutions really are not failing. They just have a difficult time doing all the things you just mentioned.
yeah. Well, I know it's a tricky time to try to figure all this out, and I know there are risks involved, but I appreciate you and scholars like you who are coming on and sharing what you know with us.
No, I'm happy to do it. I'll just add that, with my book coming out, I've done several interviews, and it's kind of an odd thing because you want to say as much as you can about Charlie and the questions that are being asked, and you don't want to come across as trying to sell a book. So it has been a tightrope.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, thanks for coming on.
All right, talk to you later.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite podcast platform, and we'll be back with another episode on Monday.
This has been another change-making conversation from Baptist News Global. The episode you've just heard is part of a special podcast series titled Highest Power, Church and State. Be sure to follow BNG daily at baptistnews.com and subscribe to get notifications about future episodes. Baptist News Global is a national nonprofit news service that is independent, free, and faithful. BNG is supported by readers and listeners like you. Learn more at baptistnews.com.
This episode was produced and edited by Mac Bowles of TKG Communications, LLC, Dallas, Texas.